geographers, it's time to talk about urban geography, the geography of cities. Today we're going to look at challenges for fast-growing cities, and if you can remember from last time, most of those megacities, the fast-growing cities, are found in the poorer regions of the world. So yeah, when they're not flush with cash, for sure they're going to have some problems. Got some learning goals for you today. They are, you're going to know the challenges for fast-growing cities, as the title mentioned. Rad. You're also going to be able to interpret maps. Going to show you a few maps and ask you a few questions about them. And you're going to know about slums. Finally, a little activity teaching you how to use evidence. Alrighty, first heading, challenges for fast-growing cities. So newer residents who move into cities are poorer than the ones that already live there. They've had to spend a lot of money to move, blah, blah, blah. So as your city grows, the newer residents are poorer, so that's going to reduce the overall average richness of people in your city, which could be a problem. Yeah, as mentioned, I've kind of been mentioning this over the last few lessons, but you get this perfect storm where the places that are the fastest growing are also the poorest, the least capable of being able to put in all the infrastructure that you need to grow a city to massive levels. So what kind of problems are we thinking of here? We're thinking of poverty, as mentioned. Unemployment is another one. Is there going to be enough jobs for all the people moving to your city? Long commute times. So new residents will often live in the cheapest housing, which is on the outskirts of town, but you often find employment in the middle of the town, so people have got to commute from the burbs into the city centre, and that's definitely the case in Melbourne, especially in a lot of the new northern suburbs. Sanitation might not necessarily be that great. That's especially true in developing countries where they may not be able to afford expensive sewerage and water infrastructure, which leads to poor public health. Big link between bad sanitation and poor public health. One of the main reasons why the average life expectancy has gone up over the last 100 years or so is a huge increase in sanitation. So like clean drinking water, toilets and stuff. And pollution. Every megacity's friend, or frenemy, I guess you'd say. It's always there. With human comes pollution. Right, so here's a map. In fact, it's a rad-as GIF that changes over time. It's showing you the world's 20 most populous megacities starting in 2010, going all the way up to 2100. So this is just a projection, yeah, it's an estimate. And it shows you, so you'll see. So let's have a look at some questions here. So let's pretend it's 2010 because there's no thing on here for 2020, I don't think. So where are the most populated cities now? And by now I mean 2010. Oh, we could do 2025. So where are the most populated cities right now? Like what location? So I want you to use geographic language and describe where in the world the megacities are in 2010. How is that distribution going to change in the future? So compare where the megacities are in 2010 with where the megacities are in 2100. They change fairly markedly. We might even have a few approaching 100 million, which is freaky. And why, given that new distribution, where all those megacities are going to be located in 2100, why do you reckon that in particular might be a problem? What is it about the countries that are going to have those megacities that may be an issue for them being able to develop whoppingly large cities? And I think I've hinted at that quite enough. So pause this if you need to. I want you to write down the answers to those questions. Right. Little case study about a slum in Mumbai called DHARAVI. They're known as the rag pickers. So they sift through rubbish and find stuff that still has value and resell that. Which, if you think about it, that's quite clever. They're recycling essentially, so good for the environment. But, you know, it would be quite a difficult job. There'll be a lot of health challenges, I think, for a start. So, yeah, Mumbai is a mega city. I think it's got about 30 million people. Almost all of its waste is recycled by those rag pickers. Whereas Australia only recycles 55%, and that's not done by people, it's done by machines in Australia. Australian recycling has had a major problem in the last kind of 2 years because we were previously sending most of our recycling to China to be recycled. However, and one tricky thing about Australia's recycling is that we have commingled recycling, meaning you put all of your different recycling in the same thing. And most other countries in the world, you have to separate the recycling yourself. So you have a paper bin, a glass bin, plastics, whatever. In Australia, when they set up the recycling system, I think they must have figured, nope, Aussies are too lazy to separate, so we'll make them chuck it all in the same bin. Now, the problem with that is that you then get quite a lot of contamination. It's quite tricky to separate the different types of recycling, and you get a lot of contamination in the sense that people put stuff in recycling that shouldn't be recycled. So food scraps, you know, cardboard, pizza boxes. Once cardboard or paper has been used to store food in, it cannot be recycled because it gets all the grease and stuff. So Australia had really high levels of contamination in its recycling, and China about a year, 18 months ago said, no, we're going to increase our strictly bar with the amount of contamination that we will allow. And so most of Australia's recycling could then not be accepted by China. So Australia had to go, well, for a start, what happened is heaps of local councils just sent all their recycling straight to landfill, which is depressing. But now Australia is scrambling to build its own recycling plants, so it doesn't have to rely on the rules of another country to recycle its waste. Random sidetrack. Right, so the Indian government plans on demolishing this slum. This is a huge slum, takes up quite a chunk of Mumbai. I don't know what they think is going to happen to all the people that live there. So they're saying they're going to replace it with high-rise apartments. Obviously the locals don't want it. So here's the DHARAVI slum here. Here it is again here. So I think I'm guessing at the top of that photo is just the rest of Mumbai, and then the slum is just all the low-rise buildings in the foreground. Yeah. More DHARAVI. We're going to watch a short doco about DHARAVI at the end of this video anyway. But it's fascinating. Huge, very, very dense population. So like lots of people living in a small space. A lot of blue tarps. Right. You're reading. As always, I want you to read the chapter that this lesson relates to. I've summarized it in note form, so I've taken out some of the brain work for you, but you still need to read that chapter. Material from the chapter that hasn't necessarily been in your notes may still be in the exam, so totes, read it. Right, it's time for an activity. So I want you to imagine that you are collecting information about whether or not to demolish the DHARAVI slum in Mumbai. Trying to gather things that are for and against that view. What kinds of things would be evidence for or against the proposal? So what kind of information could you find to say, oh no, we shouldn't knock down the slum? And equally, what kind of evidence might you find to say, yes, we should definitely knock down the slum? So what I'm asking you is, what kinds of things could you find without actually looking for it? Just what would be convincing, no, we should keep the slum? What would be convincing that, no, we need to knock it down? So you can roll up a little table like that, and I want you to come up with at least 3 things that you reckon would be evidence that we should demolish it, and 3 things that would suggest we should protect the slum. You don't actually have to go and do the research. I'm just asking you. I want to see if you can figure out what kinds of things would be evidence for and against the proposal. Do that in your exercise book. Okay, here's a video about DHARAVI, just like I promised. This one here is from TED Ed. TED is a website with heaps of cool talks. ED's obviously their education sub-department there, and this is all about urbanization, which, as you hopefully know by now, is the growth of cities and the future of cities. Take it away, TED Ed.
Today, more than half of all people in the world live in an urban area. By mid-century, this will increase to 70%. But as recently as 100 years ago, only 2 out of 10 people lived in a city, and before that, it was even less. How have we reached such a high degree of urbanization, and what does it mean for our future? In the earliest days of human history, humans were hunter-gatherers, often moving from place to place in search of food. But about 10,000 years ago, our ancestors began to learn the secrets of selective breeding and early agricultural techniques. For the first time, people could raise food rather than search for it, and this led to the development of semi-permanent villages for the first time in history. Why only semi-permanent, you might ask? Well, at first the villages still had to relocate every few years as the soil became depleted. It was only with the advent of techniques like irrigation and soil tilling about 5,000 years ago that people could rely on a steady and long-term supply of food, making permanent settlements possible. And with the food surpluses that these techniques produced, it was no longer necessary for everyone to farm. This allowed the development of other specialized trades and, by extension, cities. With cities now producing surplus food as well as tools, crafts, and other goods, there was now the possibility of commerce and interaction over longer distances. And as trade flourished, so did technologies that facilitated it, like carts, ships, roads, and ports. Of course, these things required even more labor to build and maintain, so more people were drawn from the countryside to the cities as more jobs and opportunities became available. If you think modern cities are overcrowded, You may be surprised to learn that some cities in 2000 BC had population densities nearly twice as high as that of Shanghai or Calcutta. One reason for this was that transportation was not widely available, so everything had to be within walking distance, including the few sources of clean water that existed then. And the land area of the city was further restricted by the need for walls to defend against attacks. The Roman Empire was able to develop infrastructure to overcome these limitations, but other than that, modern cities as we know them didn't really get their start until the Industrial Revolution, when new technology deployed on a mass scale allowed cities to expand and integrate further, establishing police, fire, and sanitation departments, as well as road networks and later electricity distribution. So what is the future of cities? Global population is currently more than 7 billion and is predicted to top out around 10 billion. Most of this growth will occur in the urban areas of the world's poorest countries. So how will cities need to change to accommodate this growth? First, the world will need to seek ways to provide adequate food, sanitation, and education for all people. Second, growth will need to happen in a way that does not damage the land that provides us with the goods and services that support the human population. Food production might move to vertical farms and skyscrapers, rooftop gardens, or vacant lots in city centers, while power will increasingly come from multiple sources of renewable energy. Instead of single-family homes, more residences will be built vertically. We may see buildings that contain everything that people need for their daily life, as well as smaller, self-sufficient cities focused on local and sustainable production. The future of cities is diverse, malleable, and creative, no longer built around a single industry, but reflecting an increasingly connected and global world.
Alrighty, please write down the words reflection activity in your exercise book, and this is it. With the topic of fast-growing cities, what's one plus about fast-growing cities? What's one minus about fast-growing cities? And what's something that's just, interesting about fast-growing cities? Just write 3 things with those headings in your exercise book. Merci beaucoup for taking part in this lesson, and don't ever forget to keep it real.